Hey guys, Jason. And here recently there's been a lot of news, and I've got a few emails, so I thought I would make a video to address it, about Microsoft accepting Bitcoins. Now everyone sees this as a big deal, and it really is. So I want to kind of backtrack, because it's getting near to the end of 2014. 2014. Now, when Bitcoin first came along, I was about 15 years old. Bitcoin was not even accepted anywhere, which is kind of strange to think about. Bitcoin wasn't accepted online. One of the first big things was, and you probably heard the story about all the thousands of Bitcoins spent to buy a pizza. I now think the price of that, the value of that pizza, very expensive. So people ask me, they email me, they say, Jason, what's this mean for Bitcoin? Well, it's not as if Bitcoin suddenly changes because Microsoft adapted. What it does mean is that Bitcoin's adoption rate is improving. So we saw Overstock.com start accepting Bitcoins, and a lot of people use Bitcoins. One of the issues that persists itself is when these sites start accepting Bitcoins are that the users don't really use Bitcoin to buy things. A lot of the sites that I've read, it differentials, but the smaller sites say, yeah, we accept Bitcoins, and they might say 2 or 3% of our sales are Bitcoin, which isn't not very much. But we had sites like Overstock.com who accepted Bitcoins, and they saw huge profit margins, or sales, like I should say, when it became pertaining to people buying with Bitcoin, which was a big plus. It shows that Bitcoin is starting to move from a commodity, like I talked about before, to a currency, to a feasible currency, likewise as the USD. And if you haven't heard, the Russian currency right now is going crazy. It's dropping like I can't believe. And a lot of services, even like Steam, has come out and said, we can't accept the Russian money right now because it's so volatile. So when people talk about Bitcoin's volatility, it kind of brings into reference to an actual nation, Russia, having issues with their currency. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, Jason, is this going to bring a push towards Bitcoin? By itself, not necessarily, but it always seems to be in situations where economies, currency, or nation's national de facto currency, be it the United States USD or the Russians' currency, when they start to fail or not live up to the expectations of the society, we notice that citizens start to invest in commodities. And I reference that because people invest in gold. We note this in the Great Depression. People were buying gold and then they made gold illegal to own. So Bitcoins itself, there's this big debate, and a lot of people say, some people say, oh, it's a currency, some people say, oh, it's a commodity, and there's this big back and forth. I think it's a little bit in between. I've talked about in videos before how I think it's more of a commodity right now, because it's like gold. You can buy things with gold, it's not as easy. Bitcoin's starting to move into that realm where it is a currency that can be used. So Microsoft accepting Bitcoin by itself, not that big a deal, but what it is a bigger deal is in the broad scheme of things. When we look back in 10 years about Bitcoin being used to buy things, we're not going to look and say Microsoft was the big one. What we're going to say is, look at all these companies that over this linear 5-year period, or 10-year period, accepted Bitcoins. And we'll say it's not just one company that made Bitcoin explode. It's that fact that all these companies, over time, started accepting Bitcoins. And it seems that the bigger and bigger companies are accepting Bitcoin. We saw Overstock, then Newegg, now we're seeing Microsoft. Microsoft of all companies. Microsoft is a huge Fortune 100 company. The fact that they accept Bitcoins now is phenomenal. It shows that Bitcoin has standing. Now, what the big thing is like I said, Microsoft accepting is not the nail in the coffin. It's one of the nails, but it's not the nail. What will be the nail is when we get to the point where the average citizen knows what Bitcoin is and considers using it. One of the problems with that is the versatility. If we can fix the versatility rate, we'll be better off. But I just kind of wanted to address this. I have people email me all the time saying, oh, Jason, is the Microsoft thing the big deal? And I didn't really want to do a video on it because it was overhyped. And granted, it should be, because Microsoft is a pretty big company. Accepting Bitcoin is newsworthy. But what's big and more newsworthy is the fact that Bitcoin's growing adoption rate. People like to look at the price, and I get emails all the time. Some of them I get into the point I don't reply. They say, well, Jason, the price is down, Bitcoin's failing, I canceled out my money. I'm saying, no, Bitcoin was in a hype. Bitcoin was overvaluated, is what some people are saying. Now, I think we're too far into it to really give a good guesstimate on what's going on, to be honest. But the way I look at it is when I got into Bitcoin, it was like $2.34, 35 cents, around that range. So from my perspective, Bitcoin is still fundamentally exploded. It's still at $300 some odd. It changes rapidly, but $300. Think about it. When I was 16 years old, Bitcoin was about $5 a coin. Now it's 300. I'm 19 years old. You can do the math. That kind of explosion is fundamental. Now I know people say, well, Bitcoin's market share, market cap ratio, and all these things. They say, well, Bitcoin's still not there. It's not. Bitcoin's not there, but it is adapting. I wanted to reference something because it is the end of the year, so I feel like I can, start talking about this stuff. If you would have talked to me back when I was, 16, looking into Bitcoin, Bitcoin was $5. The services around Bitcoin were very limited. Now, every day I get information about, for instance, there's one I'm going to do a video on called ZeroClick, where you can pay micropayments to you a website with Bitcoin. There are services that you can use money to be anonymous. You can send money to these Mixer accounts. Do I have the name here? Yeah, I do. Bitcoin or bitmixer.io. I've actually used it before, but trying to remember the name's kind of hard. And these sites allow you to take money and put it into Bitcoin, and it becomes anonymous, so you can give donations without your name being attached to it if you wanted to. The services are starting to catch up to the price. I think we're really going to see some really fundamental things in 2015. But I think, honestly, we can't look at this in the short term. I watched a video before, the World Bitcoin Network, and this guy is so smart. I've watched every single one of his videos. He's incredibly intelligent. And one of the things he talks about is, I don't do it justice summarizing him, so you should go watch his videos. But World Bitcoin Network, go check him out. But he does these things where he explains, comparing Bitcoin to venture capitalists, investing in a firm. And he compares it to Twitter, and he says, well, look at Twitter and how long it took Twitter to explode, and then by the time it hit the stock market, the venture capitalists were out of it. That's how Bitcoin's going to be. It's going to take a while. It's a train. It's going to take a while to get to its location, to its destination. But when it does, we're going to look back and say, I'm happy I rode that train, and I think the fact that I was here when Bitcoin was developing. People say, well, Jason, I feel like I got into Bitcoin too late. No, you didn't. The services are still being developed. Bitcoin's price, $300 a coin, is still, I believe, too low. It's the same as if when I got in. I got in with Bitcoin. I remember the first time I looked at Bitcoin's price. It was around $230, and I was never telling my dad. I looked at it because I had read about the $30 price increase. I said, I lost out. And then again, I remember seeing this again. This is the one I always remember. Bitcoin was going over $7 a coin. $7 a coin. And I remember telling my family and everybody saying, I lost out. I bought some Bitcoins at $7. And I said, I'll probably never make this money back, but at least I invested in this community. And look, now here I am sitting, and Bitcoin's worth $300 a coin. Now, it did top out at $1,200. It's going to flow. It's a market. So, don't look at the price today and judge it. Look at the price 5 years and look back and judge the price that it was today. I'm going to leave you with that kind of analogy to think about. Have a great day, and go Bitcoin.